Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a Kung Pao chicken recipe that I had written for our YouTube channel over on the YouTubes, which is loosely inspired by a Panda Express hack that I had put together a little while back. The version that we're doing today is actually going to be following pretty closely to that Panda Express version, mostly just because I kind of wanted something a little bit sweeter today. So if you have any questions for me, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. What we're going to do is we're going to use a couple of things that I like to use when we're sort of like trying to pull out the Americanized qualities of Chinese food that come up a lot for me. Usually those involve a lot of sweet things. So today that's going to be, we're going to be using some Hoisin Sauce, and we're also actually just going to be using some brown sugar, both of which are going to really be using, we're really going to be using those to replicate that really iconic, like sweeter quality of Chinese food that you get in like more Americanized Chinese food, like Panda Express. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to drop those questions in the chat. I'll do my best to answer everyone. I don't know everything about Kung Pao chicken, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least entertaining to watch. As always, as I mentioned earlier, everything that we cook on the live streams, there's almost always some kind of recipe video that already lives over on the channel. This particular version is a recipe that we had done, which was based off of, inspired by basically what we were doing is recreating a lot of the foods from like really, really iconic Chinese American cuisine. So lots of times that series ends up being things from Panda Express and P.F. Chang's, stuff like that. And then what we usually do in that series is I'll generally do a second attempt and sort of like take a shot at like recreating what it would look like if we did some of those really Americanized dishes through the lens of like more traditional wok frying and seeing like sort of what ingredients that would involve. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel, check out what's going on over there. We've got new recipes that are out every Friday, so tomorrow, as in Friday as in tomorrow, we're coming out with a recipe for a Pad Ga Prao, which is a Thai street food dish that's basically, I guess it's more colloquially, you would see it on menus as like Thai basil chicken or something to that effect, usually involving some form of minced meat. Probably most commonly that's going to be chicken, minced chicken, and then most prominently what it does feature is the use of Thai basil, which is a very, very iconic Thai ingredient, or usually more traditionally you would probably see it done actually with holy basil, but today for that recipe I used Thai basil because it's what you can get here in the Bay Area. So stuff like that all popping up over on the YouTube channel, so if you haven't hopped over there yet, definitely find your way over next, because lots of fun stuff coming up every Friday. Cool. We're also, by the way, working our way up to 5,500 subscribers by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please pop over and subscribe. Lots of fun things coming. Alright, so first up for our stir fry today, though, I'm starting off, that was 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by what should be about an inch or about a tablespoon's worth of ginger. I'm kind of feeling like this is going to be too much ginger, but I also don't want to really deal with trying to trim it down, so the reason that I always say about an inch or about a tablespoon of finely minced ginger is because ginger grows in a really weird shape because it's a root. So what often happens when you're working with things like ginger is that we have to estimate because it's kind of hard to see what we actually need. So if I say we need a tablespoon of finely minced ginger, well, that's not going to be really really very useful if you haven't minced it yet. So it's kind of hard to tell what you actually need. So usually I'll say about a tablespoon or about 1 inch's worth, but that's always going to be an estimate. And frequently for me that ends up being, I'll often end up overshooting it because it just doesn't really make sense to like trim down the garlic at a certain point. Or trim down the ginger at a certain point. Because what are you going to do, like chop off like a tiny little wedge of it and then you just have this tiny wedge of ginger floating. It's kind of annoying. So I'm giving my ginger, the garlic, you might have noticed all I did was just really like smashed it and then kind of started chopping it up. Basically a rough chop. For the ginger though, we do need to give that ginger a real good fine mince because the ginger, unlike the garlic, which is also very, very delicate, the ginger is a pretty durable root veggie. So if you don't go through and actually do this fine mince, it's actually not going to come apart and you'll just have big chunks of ginger floating around, which is never very good. So don't cut corners on your fine minces. Sometimes I do though. Alright, so that's our ginger, which does look like it might be too much ginger, but we'll adjust accordingly. Then next up, this is going to be 3 green onions. Usually I would call for probably closer to 2, but these are going to spoil soon, so I'm going to use them up. And what I like to do, you probably see me do this with like most of the green onions that I use in most recipes. What I like doing is separating the whites and greens. So here's our whites, which are a little bit thicker and more durable. They have like a little bit more rigidity qualities to it. And then what I like to do with the whites, just give it a thin slice, and then we're going to use this in the wok fry. So this is going to go in with the aromatics, so that's with our garlic and ginger. These tend to be, because they are a little bit more rigid, a little bit more durable, and can kind of like withstand that really aggressive wok heat. Whereas the greens, which I just set aside, probably don't want to try and cook those greens because they're so delicate. What will happen is if you throw them into the wok fry, they're probably just going to start like wilting, and then you're just going to have like wilted green onions, which is not really useful. It's not going to ruin a dish, but it's also not going to really do anything either. So what I like to do is you'll see me separate it, and then we're going to chop these a little bit thinner, and we're going to save these as a garnish. And we'll just basically use these raw, which is nice. So we're giving these a slice pretty thinly on a bias, and then these are going to be our raw garnish. There we go. So there's our green onions. Kung Pao chicken, by the way, if you haven't noticed, or if you've watched one of these streams before, maybe you have noticed. But a Kung Pao chicken recipe is basically just one big vegetable stir fry. So as we start chopping, you will notice that almost everything that we're chopping today, except for the chicken, is basically just chopping a whole bunch of veggies, which is kind of the essence of a lot of Chinese stir fries, really. So if, you'll notice, so the original recipe that we did for that Panda Express version, it called for, it calls for bell pepper, a zucchini, and bell pepper, a zucchini, and it does not contain any onion. I think that's because that's what the actual Panda Express Kung Pao chicken is made with. Is probably a red bell pepper, a green zucchini, and then it doesn't contain any onion. It does. And that's sort of like the Panda Express iconic Kung Pao chicken. So the way that we're going to do it today, I actually don't have any bell pepper, and I forgot to get a zucchini. Or actually, I didn't forget, but I just decided not to because I have a bunch of vegetables left over in my fridge that I wanted to eat up. So we're going to adapt the recipe today and kind of swap it out with a couple of other vegetables that have just sort of been sitting in my refrigerator. So we're going to take a look at that. But essentially, if you've ever noticed a Kung Pao chicken, there's nothing particularly complicated or unique about it. It's basically just a gigantic vegetable stir fry. Which means that you can sub things out as needed depending on what's in your refrigerator, which is exactly what we're doing today. So for our version today, what I'm going to be using, this is going to be a little bit of celery. This is 2 carrots and then half of a medium white onion. The original recipe, again, it calls for bell pepper, zucchini, and then bell pepper and a zucchini. But if you don't have any of those things, you could sub it out for whatever's in your fridge. Take a look and use what you've got. So I'm starting out with my carrots here, which I'm slicing on a bias into coins. You frequently will see me when we do coins with carrots. I like to do it on a bias. And the reason for that is because carrots, they often grow in weird shapes, so the bias cut tends to help us make sure that we get nice even chops going. Like so. So with that bias cut, we can kind of adjust it to the way depending on like how that carrot is shaped, which means that we get these nice even coins of carrot that are all shaped in relatively similar sizes, and that helps it kind of cook evenly. Alright, so that's our carrot. Next up, I have a whole bunch of celery. I literally have two stalks of this celery, which I could not for a while think of what to do with it, so I'm actually going to use it in today's recipe. One of the original recipes for the kung pao chicken, so in the one that we did in that YouTube video, we did two different versions. I think the second version, the Wu Can Cook version, it called for a whole bunch of celery, because celery is a pretty common substitute in kung pao chicken. In my opinion, I don't really think that celery actually tastes like much once it's cooked. So what I always have thought of celery as is more of like a filler ingredient, as in just sort of like takes up space in a recipe. So it's particularly useful if you don't know what else to put into a recipe. I also kind of think of it that's sort of like the same thing, or the same reason why we use it in things like sofrito, which is sort of like the basis for a lot of like Italian pastas, like bolognese and stuff like that. I kind of get the impression that the reason that it comes up and stuff like that is because it doesn't really have any like flavor, so it's really just sort of building out the thickness of a sauce, which, by the way, what we're using today is exactly what a sofrito is. So what I always say is if you have some celery on hand and you're making a vegetable stir fry like we are today, it tends to be a good one to sort of throw in because it's going to sort of just work really well with our stir fry. It's not going to taste like much, but it's going to fill out the vegetable stir fry quite a bit. So I'm giving this, just like our carrots, I'm giving it a chop on a bias. You'll also notice that before I started chopping it, I snapped it in half. I've seen some people do this, some people I assume that they don't bother doing it. I always like snapping it in half because I kind of get the impression that when you start snapping when you snap the celery in half, basically what's happening is it has a bunch of stringy membrane that kind of sticks to it. That's basically what's running up and down the celery. So it's useful when you snap it in half that you can pull off that stringy membrane so you don't end up having to chew through it, which I find is really annoying. So again, I've seen skip it. I've seen other people pretty religiously do it. I personally do it with almost every piece of celery that I use, but that's just me. So that's our celery. We're going to set those both aside. Then last up, this is going to be half of a medium white onion, just half. Which we're going to do in a dice. I sliced this in half on accident earlier today, but I didn't mean to. So we're going to do this with a medium dice, so we're actually probably closer to a large dice. So the way that I like to do a large dice is very important. Because of the way that it starts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel the onion first. Manage to get the skin off. There we go. And then what we're going to do is, so I'm leaving this root on, so you can see it right here. This is the root of the onion, basically the part of the onion that goes into the soil first. So we're going to leave that root on, and then we're going to slice in radial cuts downward. And then one slice down the center. And then what we're going to do is go and cut straight through for our dice, like so. And then essentially cutting around that stem. We have this nice even dice. So basically what's happening is by leaving this root end on, it keeps that onion held together. So by holding that onion together while you cut, you don't end up with the onion sort of falling apart on you as you chop, which is what I've seen lots of people run into when they chop onions without that root end on. Alright, next up is our chicken, which is, I only have one piece of chicken today, which I don't know how that happened. I don't actually even know why I only have a single piece of chicken in the kitchen today. But here we are. So we're going to slice this up. I'm going to slice this relatively large because we only have one piece. But basically our goal here is to sort of get our chicken in a relatively similar size as the bits and pieces of veggie that we just finished cutting. So as always, this is also true for basically anything that we chop, or anytime that we do a stir fry, is that we generally want the things that are going into our stir fry to be of a similar shape and size. So, and the reason for that is because we're trying to create even bites. If they're all in different sizes, so if we have giant pieces of carrot, but really small pieces of celery, and then really giant pieces of chicken, then what happens is that you sort of have to fish around for the onions. If you ever had a vegetable get lost in the stir fry, that's how that sort of happens. So, as always, we want to pay close attention to how we chop things. So that's our chicken. Alright, and next up, so we're going to do a quick marinade here. So this is just 4 tablespoons of soy sauce. Then this is going to be 2 tablespoons of 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar, excuse me. And then finally, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. I love, by the way, adding sugar and sweet elements to marinades because I find that, especially to marinades of things that I'm planning on searing, like this chicken today, because I find that by including a little bit of sugar, it kind of helps that sear along a little bit. And then what will happen is that as we start searing, the first thing that happens, well, actually, the first thing that should happen is a little bit of cornstarch. I don't know why this isn't in the recipe. Let's add that cornstarch. So what's going to happen is the first thing that's going to happen while we start searing is the chicken is going to sear that cornstarch up first. And basically, what's going to happen is by adding that first layer of cornstarch, it's going to slow down the exterior cook of our chicken just long enough so that the interior of the chicken can catch up. And then basically what's happening is it sort of balances out our cook time, which ends up being particularly important when we're dealing with things like chicken or anything really protein heavy in a wok fry, because otherwise it will rapidly overcook because of the high heat that we're using. But I just got totally sidetracked. Another very useful thing that we're doing is I like adding a lot of sugar, or I like adding a little bit of sugar to my marinades, because I find that once that chicken starts to sear, the next thing that happens is that the sugars in that marinade, they're going to start crystallizing, and we're going to get this nice added bit of searing and texture from that sugar. Very useful. So that's our chicken. Last up, we're going to do our sauce baits here. All right. So kicking things off, this is going to be 4 tablespoons of soy sauce first, followed by 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing wine. Shaoxing wine, if you're not familiar, is a Chinese cooking wine. It is basically just dry cooking sherry, so if you can get your hands on dry cooking sherry, I always recommend it. Actually, if you, what I have started recommending is if you can get your hands on high quality dry sherry, it's probably going to be even better than Shaoxing wine, because the Shaoxing wine that you get here in the States, it's so heavily processed that what you're buying is pretty substandard Shaoxing wine already. So that dry cooking sherry is probably going to be better than the Shaoxing wine that we're using because it's higher quality. Next up, this is 2 tablespoons of oyster sauce, which, as the name implies, comes from the fermentation of oyster. Stupid camera. All right, and then last up, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of Hoisin sauce. Hoisin sauce, I always think of it, I kind of say this every time that we use Hoisin sauce, but I've always thought of Hoisin sauce as like the ketchup of Chinese food because it's so sugary and sugar forward. And I actually, when I was a kid, used to use it a lot for dipping sauces. So that's our sauce base. The last thing that we're going to assemble here, before we head over to the stove, is going to be our cornstarch slurry, which, as the name implies, is just cornstarch and water. So we're just combining cornstarch mixed with a little bit of water. And the real goal here is that what we're trying to do is break down our cornstarch into a liquid form. And the reason that we want to do that is we generally don't want to throw this cornstarch straight into the wok when we go and add our cornstarch, when we go and add it to the stir fry. Because what will happen is cornstarch has this quality about it where it will literally clump up with anything that you're using. I have done this on many occasions. It'll even clump up with hot water, so you actually very specifically, when you make your cornstarch slurry, must do it with cold water. If you do it with hot water, it will basically start cooking the cornstarch, which is also not fun. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to add that cornstarch slurry to our wok towards the end of the cook, and that's going to start thickening up our sauce base for us. All right. I think that's it. Yeah. Cool. So over on the stove, I've got my wok. It's going to get started heating up. And then the first thing that we're going to do here is sear our chicken. So we're going to add our chicken in, give it a real long 2-minute sear, and that's going to let it develop nice crispy and like crisp quality to it. And then we're going to follow it up with our veggies. So most of the time you will probably see me recommend batch cooking. In our case today, I might try and skip it. Actually, we've got those carrots. Most of the time when we do things like kung pao chicken, because it's so ingredient heavy, you'll see me recommend using a batch cook, which is essentially cooking things in sequence. So we'll cook the chicken and then we'll pull it out and then we'll cook the carrots and then remove that, and then we'll kind of move forward from there. And that's basically just making sure that the wok never gets filled up. If we fill it up and it has too many things in it, then we end up having to cook on lower heat, which is not going to be great, especially in our home kitchens. Cool. Into the wok, yeah, exactly. Cool. So once again, my name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time here, we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST, cooking new and fun things that are generally inspired by the recipes that are popping up over on my YouTube channel. Those are out every Friday. So this Friday coming up, we're coming up with a Thai stir fry called Pad Ga Prao, which comes from Thai street cooking, and it's basically, I think you commonly see it referred to as Thai basil chicken, something like that. So that's coming up this Friday. We're working our way up to 5,500 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Lots of fun things coming. So first up, before we start cooking, as always, I'm adding, this is going to be about maybe a little bit less than 4 tablespoons today. I'm going to go light on the oil for our sear. That's peanut oil, and we're giving it a nice long yao. And then first up, I'm starting off by searing our chicken here. So what I like to do when we sear stuff is I like to add that chicken one piece at a time. And the reason for this is because what I like to do is we want to make sure, for actually a couple of things, but the main reason is that we want to make sure that we don't end up stacking the chicken on top of itself like that. That's never a good place because it's basically what we're going to end up with is steamed chicken. Because we're not getting any of that chicken onto the wok surface. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that while we add that chicken to the wok, it's hitting the wok surface itself. Which, if you could dump it in real carefully, you might be able to pull that off, but I don't like to do that. It also, by adding that chicken one piece at a time, it helps us make sure that we reserve the liquid in our marinade, so that's nice. Because if you were to drop that liquid in the marinade, so today there's a whole bunch of soy sauce, there's probably a little bit of water coming off of that chicken thigh. If you drop that into the wok, it would probably splatter really hard and you're going to burn yourself pretty bad. So I have done that too. Let's get some more oil. Alright, so we're going to let this sear for a 2-minute sear. What I like to do, and you'll see me do this with a lot of wok sears, is I like to give that wok a little bit of a rotation like so. And that's just to get that oil circulating. In that round bottom wok, what you'll often find is that the wok, it starts focusing at the center of the wok, where the wok rounds out. And that's generally going to be a problem if you have stuff that's sitting on the exterior portion of the wok, like out here, because it's not going to be getting any oil. And if there's no oil making contact with the chicken, then instead of searing, you're just going to end up burning the chicken, which is never a good thing. So we're going to let that sear for a full 2 minutes, and then what we're going to do is pull it out, wipe down that wok, and then move on forward with our carrots first. So what I was about to mention is that in this case you might have been able to skip that wok fry or that batch cook because there's not really that many things going on. But in our case today, I'm actually going to be very particular about that batch cook because I do want to make sure that we get a head start on our carrots, because of the vegetables that we're using today, those carrots are significantly more dense. So since they're so much more dense, they're going to take a lot longer to cook than any of our other vegetables. So in order to make sure that those carrots actually cook through, we want to give them a head start. But first up is our chicken. We're going to make sure that this gets a nice 2-minute sear going. Yeah. Cool. And again, I'm rotating our wok nice and in nice circular motions. That's just redistributing that oil for us a little bit. Cool. And we're right at 2 minutes. I'm also like, you generally, over time, you start developing kind of a sixth sense for how your sear is going. I'm also kind of keeping an eye on what the color is looking like. There's some good wok-hei. The wok-hei, by the way, is totally optional. You don't have to go for that fire. It does look nice, but it's not adding a whole lot to the wok. Basically, what we call that is a wok-hei because it's essentially giving us all of that smoky quality to our stir fry. And essentially what we're doing is by tilting that wok forward like this, as I'm basically setting the oil on fire by catching the oil on the actual flame of the wok, of the burner. Totally optional, you don't have to do that, but I like doing it because it looks cool, but also because it adds some nice smoky qualities to our chicken. And you'll also notice that the sugars in our marinade, they're starting to play a nice part. You can see all of this nice dark browning happening right here. All of that coming from our sugar. Alright, let's pull this chicken out. So what we're going to do here is I'm removing that chicken, and then we're going to rinse off our wok. I am, for what it's worth, a big proponent of retaining fond as much as possible, and fond, a process that comes from French cooking? Yeah, French cooking. Where essentially we reserve all of that residual fat that kind of gets stuck to the bottom of your pan. And then what you do is we like to deglaze that fond in a lot of European cooking, and then use that as the basis for the sauce that we're going to build up next. In some cases, I have actually experimented with that in wok cooking. The more that I've looked into it, I've kind of found that it's not really a thing that happens very commonly in wok cooking, just generally because just how the cuisine has progressed. That doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't do it, but the more that I've experimented with it, the more that I've realized that it only really works if your marinade is not sugar heavy. So in our case today, the reason that I didn't try and deglaze that fond is because if I had let that sugar stay in, what we would be deglazing is a bunch of burnt sugar, which is not going to be really great. And you'll usually, when you do that, end up with a lot of like weird burnt charred stuff, which is not super great. So you can do it. Oftentimes you will see me do that if it's not a very sugar heavy marinade, but in our case today, probably not. So I'm giving that wok a wipe down. We're going to let it reheat one more time, and we're going to kick things off with our carrots next. In the meantime, we can take a look. Here's our finished chicken. So while our wok heats up, here's our chicken. We have all of this nice deep browning. This is what we're looking for here. All of this really crispy qualities to our chicken. All of this stuff, this is what we're looking for here. And that's going to give us that nice deep dark caramel qualities to our chicken. Oops, wrong way. Cool. So I'm going to let my wok reheat. That will probably take another like 30-45 seconds, and we'll move on to our carrots. Yeah. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on my YouTube channel every Friday. Today we're cooking through a Kung Pao chicken recipe that is part of a series that we've been doing, reproducing a lot of the foods from Panda Express. And kind of like taking a look at what it would look like if we were to reproduce those recipes, but in the lens of more traditional wok cooking. So what it would look like if you try and do it through the lens of traditional wok cooking. So that's always really interesting with Panda Express and stuff like that, because a lot of those foods, they don't really have any real basis in Chinese food at all. They're really just American foods. So what we're trying to create what we're trying to do is create Chinese versions of American food that people think is Chinese food, which is really interesting to me. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel. Lots of fun new recipes popping up every Friday. This Friday we have a Thai basil chicken coming up tomorrow. So yeah, we're working our way up to 5,500 subs by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Lots of fun stuff coming. All right, so I just ran out of peanut oil on the last cook, so today we're moving on. This is some grapeseed oil that we're moving on with. I mention this all the time, but you can totally use those oils interchangeably. If you run out of one, you can swap them out. The grapeseed oil, I usually reserve that for things like hash browns and breakfast foods, and anytime I'm cooking things that's basically not Chinese food. But you can absolutely use it in a stir fry. What's different about it is that it's more neutral, so you can use it in lots and lots of different things. That peanut oil, it's got more of an aromatic quality to it, so we generally want to be more specific about where we use it, because anywhere that you use it, you're going to end up implying some peanutty qualities to it. So I'm starting off, I'm adding my carrots, and we're going to do this very similar thing that we just did with that chicken. We're going to do a similar sear. It's going to go for 2 minutes, and just like with the chicken, we're going to rotate that wok every 30 seconds or so to kind of get that oil nice and dispersed like so. We don't need it to be completely cooked. We're not looking for like mushy carrots or anything here. What we're really just trying to do is really cook off some of that rawness that's coming with our carrots, because they're cut very, very large chunks. And what will happen is, because the other vegetables that we're using, that's going to be some onion and some celery. Those are both pretty delicate elements to include in a stir fry. So we want to be careful about that. Otherwise, what we'll end up doing is either undercooking the carrots or overcooking those more delicate veggies. Okay. So I'm going to let this go. This will go for another minute and change. And then usually what I like to do with carrots is I like to give it a nice sear for about 2 minutes, and then we're going to wok toss it for a little bit longer after that. And then that's going to give us this nice crisp and darkened quality to it. Carrots, very useful to sear on their own. We don't have to do much to it because they already have quite a bit of sugar in them, so that sugar is going to help our sear along nicely. So what we're doing is, I mentioned this earlier too, but if you've ever watched a Kung Pao chicken recipe come together, you might have noticed that a Kung Pao chicken recipe is essentially just a giant stir fry, with chicken. And I think probably the most iconic part about a Kung Pao chicken, it's not actually the chicken, but the peanuts that come with it. So we're going to take a look at how I like to do those too. You can, by the way, if you don't like cooking peanuts, or if you're feeling lazy, you can just use plain old planter peanuts. Go buy it at the liquor store and it will work fine. I actually forgot to do that, so my favorite thing to use is actually a honey roasted peanut, because it adds a nice bit of texture to the peanut. I forgot to buy some. So today I'm actually going to be cooking some raw peanuts, which is more of a specific approach because you actually have to cook that stuff. Raw peanuts, if you've ever eaten one, they are not crispy or crunchy at all. They're literally really, really chewy. So we want to be careful about that. All right. So that's 2 minutes on our carrots. I'm giving it a quick toss here. You'll notice we have some nice darkened qualities to it going. They're not quite cooked through. I do like to keep them relatively crunchy, but I do want to cook off a little bit more of that rawness before we move on here. Other very useful thing that you might notice about our wok, round bottom wok today, is that the oil is very much pooling right here in the center here. So when we cook things like our carrots today, and we give it a shift, you'll notice that for the most part it's staying relatively submerged, kind of like a shallow fry. So that's a very one of my favorite qualities about a wok fry, or about a round bottom wok. So next up, I'm adding, that's my celery and my onions going in. We're adding those both at the same time because they're both very, very delicate, and we're not going to have them in the wok for very long. You'll probably see me say this a lot when I talk about onions, but because they're so delicate, when we wok fry them, we don't want them to go for very long. Our goal here is to just let those cook for about a minute, maybe 2 minutes at most. We're really just trying to cook off some of that bite in that onion, and then after that, we're really just trying to move on from there. So we don't want any like really, really tender or translucent onions, stuff like that, things that you would do for like maybe like an egg scramble or stuff like that. We don't really want to do that because if we cooked it that far along, then you end up with a mushy stir fry, which is never good. You need a wok in your life. Yeah, you definitely should. If you don't have a wok in your life, you absolutely should. I love using this wok. This is actually probably the kitchen utensil that I think I use probably more than anything else. Other than the cutting board, this is probably the thing that I use the most. Maybe the cutting board and the knife. And then this is definitely the pan that I use the most. Mostly because it's so versatile. You can do basically anything in it. You can cook on high heat, obviously, but you can also cook on low heat. That works really, really well. You can simmer stuff. You can long cook. You can deep fry in it. Deep frying is really, really great in a wok. You can do a lot of things in a wok. Lots of people think that you can only cook on high heat, but you can do so many things in it. The wok is very, very versatile. All right, so there's our veggies. Give them a little bit of head start. I'm going to move everything to one side here, if I can. And then I'm adding my aromatics in here, so that's my garlic, followed by my ginger. Looks like too much ginger. I'm going to hold off on some of that. And these are the whites of my green onions going in. And then what we're doing here, so the reason that I shifted everything to one side is because we really want to make sure that when we use aromatics like this, that they get good solid contact with the surface of the wok. So just like when we sear, we want to make sure that our aromatics, they're hitting the wok surface. So we don't want them to sit on top of the veggies because just like we do when we sear stuff, if it sits on top of the veggies, then it's going to start steaming instead of actually blooming. So what we're looking for here is we're just trying to bloom out some of that aromatic quality. And then once you start smelling garlic and ginger, we can start giving that wok a little bit of a toss. Then there's my chicken going back in. Sauce. And then finally my sauce. You'll notice that I did not add all of it. I like to add it in a little bit smaller increments, just generally making sure that we don't over season our wok fry, which absolutely can happen. So what I like to say is add it about like a quarter cup at a time, and then stop and look. Taste it if you're not sure. And generally, if you notice that your wok fry is tightening up too quickly, don't be afraid to not use all of it. Mine seems to need a little bit more water here. And then now I'm basically just tempering it according to how much water we use, and we can also, if it's still not looking tight enough, we can let it reduce. But we generally, once we're at this point, we don't want things to start reducing here, because at this point we're basically just boiling the stir fry, which is not good. Alright, so I'm removing everything from my wok here. And then we have one more thing before we finish this up. Don't do this, by the way. Probably should not be putting a wooden bowl on your burner. Here we are. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to rinse out my wok one more time. We're not quite finished cooking yet. And then we're going to reheat this and do our peanuts really quickly. So at this point, by the way, if you have like planter peanuts or honey roasted peanuts, or really wherever you get in the snack food aisle, that will work just fine. That's actually my preference, is like more like of a honey roasted quality or something more like that. You could also do it with cashews, you could do it with almonds, stuff like that. Any of those will work fine. Today what we're working with is some raw peanuts, which means that I do have to cook those. So but what I like to do is a really quick wok toss. We want to cook it on very high heat. So we're going to get our wok ripping hot, and then we're going to very quickly toss those peanuts in. That is our rice. I was a little worried that that wouldn't finish in time. So here's our peanuts going in. I'm going to add this. It's about a 1/3 cup or so. And then basically what we're doing at this point is essentially dry toasting those peanuts. So our wok is bone dry. There's no oil at all. We're basically just giving this a little bit of heat, and that's going to toast these up nicely for us. The main thing that we're after here is just a little bit of crunch to our peanuts. If we were to add those plain straight into the wok fry, because they're still raw, we would end up with more of a chewy quality to our wok peanuts. Peanuts, by the way, if you're not familiar with or like still learning how to wok toss, the ideal thing to use for like practicing a wok toss, because they have that kind of like quality to it, and it also, because it follows the nice flow, it just gives you like a little bit more idea of like how your toss is going. Yeah, just regular peanuts. I actually much prefer like a nice honey roasted peanut. I find it like gives you a little bit of like extra like sweet crunch to it. Or get creative. I don't know, like a Cajun peanut. What other kind of peanuts are there? Chili lime peanut? I don't know. Get creative. Go to the snack food aisle. Let's actually reboot this camera. So that's pretty much all we're going to do to those peanuts though. Just a quick wok toss, and you'll notice they have picked up a little bit of blacking, darkening, and color, but mostly what they're doing is just essentially dry toasting, and that's going to do it. Now we can rinse off our wok, give it one more wipe down, and this is pretty much clean already. So now we can finally toss this into our stir fry and give it a little bit of common. Where have I been? Yeah, I've been here. Tuesday and Thursdays. Did I miss a stream? I might have missed a stream recently. I forget. So last thing that I'm adding, this is a little bit of Szechuan peppercorn, which I'm just doing straight from the pepper mill, which I don't love doing, but it'll work just fine. If you're really committed, you could also do that in a mortar and pestle, and actually what I much prefer doing is dry toasting that stuff because it blooms out nicely. But if you're really lazy, you can absolutely just straight out of the pepper mill. It's going to work fine. And that's just going to give us a little bit of added heat. Which is, I think, a little bit absent in this dish, which I kind of did intentionally because the Panda Express version has no heat at all in it. Maybe it's because you're not always online. Yeah, maybe it's because I am always online too. It's funny. Good to see you though. Yeah, thank you for tuning in. All right. So there's our Kung Pao chicken, pretty improvised. You'll notice that there's a bunch of stuff going on here that is not in the original recipe. So in the original recipe we called for, this is supposed to be some bell pepper, zucchini, and then I think there's supposed to be, there's also supposed to be some Tianjin pepper. In the original recipe it calls for all that stuff. Today what we did is we swapped that out for some celery, some carrot, and then actually a little bit of onion, mostly. The goal of, or what I really would hope is that folks take away from this is that the goal here is that a Kung Pao chicken, it's not really set in one specific way. This is actually true for most stir fries, unless you're cooking something very specific like mapo tofu or something, is that most of the time a Kung Pao chicken is really just a giant vegetable stir fry, and you can adapt it to use whatever vegetables you happen to have on hand. The vegetables that I have on hand today is a whole bunch of celery and a whole bunch of carrots, so that's what we're using. But use what you have though. And it will probably work out. If you've got broccoli, that will work. I actually have some broccoli. I should have used that broccoli. I didn't think of that. We also have, if you have like, what else? You could use green beans. Those would be really great. Frozen veggies, always a really great option. All those things that work out really nicely for you. So, cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it looks delicious. Thank you. Cool. Thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning into one of these streams, we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes. They're out on my YouTube channel every Friday. So if you're watching on Reddit, there's that YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. That's the channel that this broadcast is going to behind me. If you're watching on YouTube, that's the channel you're already on. Not in addition to the concurrent live streams, that's where the second live stream is going. You can also find the whole schedule of live streams that are coming up next. So if you want to find out what we're going to be cooking in the next couple of weeks, that's a good place to tune into. But on top of that, that's also where our recipe videos live. So if you're trying to figure out how to cook this, those tend to be a little bit more useful to bookmark because I talk a little bit slower and I don't get sidetracked quite as much. So if you're looking for stuff like that, definitely make your way over there. This one is part of a larger series that we've been doing where we've been reproducing a lot of food from like really iconic Chinese American cuisine. So this one coming from Panda Express. There's also a really popular one where we did the Mongolian beef from P.F. Chang's. We also did Panda Express's General Tso's chicken, which I thought was really tasty and interesting because it actually got discontinued after a second. So stuff like that always really interesting to me because a lot of those dishes, especially like that General Tso's chicken or honey sesame chicken, stuff like that, those are not really Chinese. That's not really Chinese food. That's really just like honey sesame chicken is just honey glazed American chicken, and which is always really interesting to me because what we're trying to do is recreate these things through the lens of traditional Chinese wok frying, which is very interesting because a lot of these things are not Chinese. They're basically just American food. So basically what we're trying to do is create Chinese versions of American food that is already kind of Chinese. So I don't know, that's really interesting to me. So if you're interested in stuff like that, find your way over to the YouTube channel. We're working our way up to 5,500 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Cool. that's it, everyone. Pad Gra Prow coming up tomorrow, and we're going to be cooking that on live stream next Tuesday. So lots of fun things coming. Do you have a video? Yes, I can absolutely do that. Oh yeah, last thing I mentioned is if you're here in the San Francisco Bay Area, our food pop-up, we have this new food pop-up that I started with a couple of friends, also called Woo Can Cook. So if you're here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we're going to be at the Hayward Farmers Market on this Saturday until 1 p.m. So if you're here in the Bay, come find us. We're serving lots of fried rice and stuff. Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon. Bye.
If you think that you don't know, never mind that you still don't love yourself. No, you can find it from somebody else. No, everybody's got to grow up. Sometimes funny how we shoot the mood. Still, will we fight it, baby? Alright, never mind. Everybody wants to be different. They still got dreams, but they don't love me like they used to love it. And I'm reminded of how bad I used to want it. And yes, I still got dreams, but more like a junkie of my 20s, and it's breaking me down. Oh no. You want to be, baby, yes, as smooth as Tennessee whiskey. You're as sweet as strawberry wine. You're bad. Glass of brandy, darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time. Oh.